The chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across the void like a living cathedral. Veins of pale light pulsed through the transparent walls, flowing around the seated delegates of 47 worlds. It was silent, so silent that Ambassador Lyra Vance could hear her own pulse echo faintly in her ears. The air itself felt rehearsed, as if the entire room waited for her to say something wrong. Across the crescent of alien representatives, eyes of every color, crystalline, scaled, and glassy, watched her with polite disinterest. To them, humanity was a curiosity, a new species that rose too quickly, burned too brightly, and talked about patience as if it were a virtue, not a weakness. Lyra stood still, her hands folded neatly before her. The motionless calm of her expression was not born of serenity, but discipline. She had learned that stillness unsettled those who mistook silence for surrender. Chancellor Vorn Alkit adjusted his shimmering mantle of light and regarded her with a voice like cracked glass. Ambassador Vance, the Council appreciates humanity's attendance despite its limited contribution to current developments. A ripple of murmured agreement passed around the chamber. Lyra smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides 100 unsaid truths. Beside her, Dr. Saren Corey scrolled through her datapad, pretending not to hear the remark. Commander Rafe Calder stood at attention a step behind, motionless in the sharp-angled uniform of the Terran Expeditionary Corps. To the Council, he looked ornamental, another soldier dragged along for a show. No one here had ever seen his kind in motion. Human patience, Admiral Threx Duran sneered from his silvered perch. His voice oozed amusement. A quaint concept from a species whose starflight barely outlasts their own lives. You mistake endurance for wisdom. Lyra's reply was gentle, almost kind. Perhaps, or perhaps patience is the art of letting others reveal themselves first. Her tone was light, but her eyes held steady. The Admiral's mandibles clicked, uncertain if she had insulted him or not. A low vibration pulsed beneath the floor, too faint for most to notice. Lyra did. Her gaze flicked to the far wall, where a faint shimmer of blue light blinked once and vanished. The Council continued debating logistics, completely unaware. Only Saren noticed Lyra's glance and frowned, whispering under her breath, "That wasn't environmental." Lyra's answer was a small shake of her head and a calm, measured inhale. Outside the chamber's panoramic window, the stars remained fixed, cold witnesses to the centuries-long rituals of diplomacy. The conversation returned to trade disputes, border tensions, the same chorus of endless politics. Yet Lyra's heartbeat had shifted, steady and deliberate, as if counting something unseen. Admiral Duran laughed again. "Tell me, Ambassador, when will humanity stop waiting for permission to act?" His question was meant to sting, but Lyra only looked up at him and said softly, "Soon enough." The words drifted across the room like a promise, faint but heavy, and though no one could see it, the faint blue shimmer flickered again, closer this time, pulsing once more before disappearing into silence. The council chamber dimmed as a sudden shift rippled through the ambient light. A technician at the far console, one of the insectoid Vereen, tapped frantically at the holographic display. Threads of alien code shimmered across the room's air. "Interference detected," it buzzed nervously. "Source unidentified. Pattern irregular." Admiral Duran made an exaggerated sigh. "Another human relay failure, no doubt. Perhaps your species should invest in maintenance before philosophy." A soft wave of laughter passed through the delegates. Lyra didn't flinch. Her gaze rested on the central display, where a faint crimson pulse appeared once, then vanished into static. Dr. Saren tilted her head. That wasn't random noise. Her voice was quiet, but firm enough to draw a few curious eyes. Lyra said nothing. She simply folded her hands behind her back and exhaled slowly, almost serenely. Commander Rafe's wrist device emitted a single hidden tone, inaudible to alien hearing. His fingers hovered just above the control surface, waiting for the unspoken signal. "Location?" Chancellor Vorn asked. His tone neutral but precise. "Uncertain," replied the technician. It flickered beyond mapped territories in the Vortex sector. No known traffic lanes. "Then it's irrelevant," Duran said, waving a clawed hand dismissively. That region's empty. Abandoned centuries ago. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. Empty? She repeated, the word tasting deliberate. The council turned toward her, puzzled by the faint smile curling at the edge of her lips. We used to call it that too. No one responded. The air thickened. For a moment, the faint hum of the council chamber's energy grid faltered again. One beat, two, and the crimson pulse flickered back to life on the display. Stronger, clearer. The Vereen technician's voice clicked in alarm. Confirmed signal pattern, repeating at precise intervals, every 7 seconds. Dr. Saren glanced toward Lyra. 7. That's not random. That's... Lyra's voice was almost a whisper. A countdown. Admiral Duran's laughter cut through the tension. A countdown to what, Ambassador? Lyra finally turned to face him, calm as ever. To what happens when patience runs out. The pulse blinked once more, 7 seconds apart, then stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. Somewhere beyond the council's reach, something vast had awakened, and only the humans seemed unsurprised. For several long moments, no one spoke. The crimson pulse had vanished, leaving behind only a residual shimmer of static on the main display. The delegates exchanged wary glances, their composure fraying under the weight of uncertainty. Nothing unsettled the Galactic Council more than the unknown, and humanity had just introduced it in silence. Chancellor Vorn cleared his throat, the crystalline timbre of his voice cutting through the quiet. Ambassador Vance, are we to believe your people had no prior knowledge of this event? His tone wasn't accusatory yet, but suspicion hung in the air like fine dust. Lyra met his gaze without hesitation. We monitor the same channels as you, Chancellor. Nothing more. The words were true enough to sound convincing, yet calm enough to invite doubt. Dr. Saren tapped her data pad, bringing up faint sensor echoes of the Vortai region. The readings were old, decades old, and strangely familiar. There was infrastructure there once, she murmured, long before we joined the council. Vorn frowned. Abandoned outposts, mining relics. Hardly relevant. But Saren's expression darkened as she zoomed in on a faint energy lattice buried deep beneath planetary crust. Then why is something we built 100 years ago still sending power signatures? Admiral Duran's laughter grated like metal scraping stone. Because humans cling to ghosts of their failed experiments. Lyra let him speak. She always let them talk first. Patience was its own weapon. Her mind drifted, not far but back, to Earth's long winters, to centuries of civilizations learning to wait out storms and droughts and wars. Humanity's story had never been about speed. It had been about endurance. You see, Admiral, she said softly, our history taught us that time is the most reliable ally. Empires fall to impatience long before they run out of strength. Her words drew quiet. Even Duran's mandibles stopped moving. Vorn's light flickered uneasily. You speak as if this was anticipated. Lyra's eyes shifted toward the stars outside the chamber window, her voice almost wistful. We've always anticipated something. The universe rarely rewards the unprepared. A murmur rippled through the room. Saren exchanged a glance with Rafe. Unspoken understanding. Somewhere beneath all the formality and performance, humanity was holding its breath. The council resumed debate, dismissing the signal as anomaly data, but the humans didn't join in. They simply watched, waiting, counting. Every 7 seconds the light flickered faintly across the chamber wall again, invisible to alien eyes but sharp as a heartbeat to Lyra's. Patience wasn't idleness, it was strategy. And deep beneath the forgotten crust of the Vortai enclave, something humanity had built long before their seat at the council table, quietly opened its eyes. The next pulse didn't fade, it erupted. Every display in the council chamber flared white for a fraction of a second, followed by cascading streams of alien code racing down the walls like waterfalls of light. The delegates shouted in confusion, their translator devices stuttering under the overload. The chamber trembled once, as if struck by some distant thunder no one could hear. Report! Chancellor Vorn's voice fractured through the chaos. The Vereen technician's mandibles quivered. Signal strength increasing exponentially. Origin confirmed. Vortai Enclave, second moon, surface destabilization. Surface destabilization? Admiral Duran barked. You mean detonation? The display shifted, showing a live feed from deep space observation drones. Where a cold gray satellite once orbited, a sphere of molten light now expanded outward, beautiful and terrible. The council gasped. Fragmented readings scrolled across the feed. Controlled energy dispersal, synchronized ignition patterns, all impossibly precise. This wasn't natural, Saren said quietly. That's not an explosion. It's an activation. Duran snapped his claws. A weapon, perhaps? Human mining debris, waking from your incompetence? Lyra didn't answer. She was watching the data unfold. Each pulse, each pattern, like someone tracing a language they already knew by heart. The cadence was deliberate. 7-second intervals again, controlled, measured, intentional. Ambassador Vance, Vorn pressed, if you have knowledge. I don't, she interrupted gently, but I recognize the rhythm. Rafe stepped forward, finally breaking his silence. Permission to transmit a caution signal to Terran Command, he said, voice level. Standard protocol for unknown activation. Vorn hesitated, but Duran waved dismissively. Let them send their little signal. Whatever this is, it's beyond human reach. Rafe nodded once. His hand brushed the console on his wrist. Somewhere across the void, far beyond the Council's limited sensors, an encrypted transmission leapt into the dark. A pulse so faint it vanished instantly against the static of space. The holographic feed zoomed closer. The moon's crust was tearing open, revealing vast hexagonal structures beneath, glowing from within. It wasn't chaos, it was geometry, design, the pattern of intention. What is that? One delegate whispered. Lyra's voice carried over the silence like a thread of steel. Something we buried a long time ago. The room froze. Even the ambient hum seemed to stop listening. Duran's laughter faltered. You mean, humans did this? Lyra turned her gaze toward him, eyes cold and calm. We prepared for the day someone else would come first. A sudden distortion cut through the transmission. For a heartbeat, the feed showed something moving, massive, angular, unfolding from beneath the moon's fractured surface. Then the screen went black. When the image returned, a single phrase pulsed across the display in Old Terran code, unreadable to most. Only Lyra, Rafe, and Saren understood. 3 words. Dawn Vale is awake. The council chamber stayed dim. No one dared move. The words that had appeared, Dawn Vale is awake, still pulsed faintly on the central display, like an afterimage burned into every mind. The translators could not interpret the script, but the rhythm of it felt deliberate, like a heartbeat counted in iron. Chancellor Vorn leaned forward, light from his crystalline body scattering across the table. Ambassador Vance, explain. Lyra exhaled slowly. Dawn Vale is a network, an old one. Her voice was quiet, but each syllable carried weight. A contingency project from before humanity entered this council. Before any of you even noticed we had left our cradle. Contingency for what? Duran snapped. His tone tried to sound amused, but there was strain in it now. For being underestimated. A low murmur rippled through the delegates. Dr. Saren's hands trembled slightly as she expanded the display. The data stream resolved into an orbital map showing hundreds of points flaring alive around the Vortai Enclave. What appeared as debris fields now aligned into perfect orbital rings. Each point pulsed in that same 7-second rhythm. Rafe's voice broke the silence. Sentinel Array. It was built to lie dormant, feeding on stellar drift. It listens, waits, and mirrors what it hears. Mirrors? Vorn asked. Copies any hostile transmission, reflects it back amplified. Lyra's eyes never left the display. Not an attack system, a warning, a deterrent woven into silence. Duran's laugh returned, brittle. You expect us to believe your species constructed a planetary lattice in secret, without resources, without permission? Rafe answered, tone measured. You called us inefficient. That gave us the freedom to work unnoticed. The projection zoomed deeper, revealing skeletal arcs of metal under the moon's crust, each pulse connecting through quantum relays toward the outer dark. Lines of faint blue light stretched across the map until they vanished beyond charted space. Saren whispered, "How far does it go?" Lyra's answer came after a pause. "As far as it needs to." Another technician spoke up, voice shaking. "The activation wave is spreading, 2 additional moons lighting up, same sequence. The array is communicating with something older." Duran slammed a claw against the table. "You've unleashed a threat none of us can control." "No," Lyra said evenly. "We woke a promise we made to ourselves, to never be caught unprepared again." The delegates looked from one another to the humans. They realized then that the calm demeanor they had mistaken for hesitation was something else entirely. Patience, calculation. Decades of preparation disguised as humility. Vorn's glow dimmed to a cold, contemplative hue. "How long has it been waiting?" Rafe's eyes flicked toward Lyra. She spoke without hesitation. 206 years. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The idea that a species with lifespans barely exceeding a century would begin a project it would never live to see complete unsettled everyone present. Saren looked around the table, voice soft. "That's what you never understood about us. We build things for our children to finish." The holographic image shifted again, displaying the moon's surface as vast panels unfolded, revealing a mirrored lattice glimmering with reflected starlight. It was beautiful in its restraint. No weapons firing, no armies marching. Just quiet machinery turning slowly, deliberately, as though testing its joints after a long sleep. Lyra finally turned back to the council. "Dawnveil isn't an attack. It's a reminder." "Of what?" Vorn asked. "That patience," she said, "isn't weakness. It's the longest reach of strength." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the display zoomed outward one last time, showing faint answering lights awakening in other sectors, distant echoes of the same ancient code. The realization struck everyone at once. Humanity hadn't just built one Dawnveil. They had built many. And they had been waiting for someone to notice. No one spoke as the new data unfolded. Lines of light spidered outward from the Vortai enclave, rippling through mapped sectors like threads woven by invisible hands. Each pulse arrived in perfect sequence, 7 seconds apart, spreading faster than any fleet could travel. The Council's sensor operators scrambled to keep up, their displays filling with blooming signatures that made no sense. Admiral Duran rose halfway from his seat, voice sharpened by fear. "Those are human relays, hundreds of them. They're activating across every corridor of space." "They were always there," Lyra said. Her tone was soft, but it cut through the noise. "You just never looked closely enough." The next feed appeared, a view from an unmanned station orbiting the frontier. What it saw made the chamber fall still. From the black edge of the void, faint silhouettes emerged, massive constructs moving in perfect synchronization. They carried no insignia, no engines visible, only faint glows along their hulls as if they were absorbing light rather than emitting it. "What are those?" Vorn whispered. "Autonomous sentinels," Rafe replied. "Unmanned, each one designed to guard a region for a generation." "They're weapons," Duran hissed. "They're guardians," Lyra corrected, "but they don't differentiate much when threatened." At that moment, the chamber lights dimmed again. An emergency transmission overrode the council feed. A distant outpost had detected unidentified warships breaching the border. Not human, not council, something else. The room filled with overlapping voices. Vorn ordered the council fleets to respond. Duran shouted for tactical data, but before any fleet could mobilize, the sentinel icons on the display turned toward the incoming threat. They moved silently, efficiently. No fanfare, no grand speeches. Within minutes, the feed changed to a grainy image of the invading ships tearing through the dark. Then a streak of light cut across the void, precise, surgical. One after another, the enemy signals vanished from the grid. The council stared, transfixed. Duran's voice came out a whisper. They anticipated an invasion we didn't even imagine. Lyra stood with her hands clasped behind her back. Patience gives clarity. We prepare before panic demands it. Saren added quietly, and patience remembers. The last enemy ship blinked out. The sentinels slowed, folding their limbs back into stillness, their glow fading until they were indistinguishable from the surrounding stars. Silence swallowed the chamber again. Only the faint hum of the translation devices filled the air. The delegates looked at the humans, not with contempt anymore, but with something colder. Understanding. Vorn's crystalline body dimmed to gray. How long have you had this power? Lyra's eyes met his. Since the first time we learned how to wait. The lights on the display flickered once, then died away completely. Nothing moved now, but the memory of what had just happened lingered. A silent reminder that the most dangerous predator in the galaxy wasn't the fastest nor the fiercest. It was the one that learned to stay still until the moment mattered. When the last image faded from the chamber screens, the light returned in slow, uncertain pulses. No one moved. The silence was no longer ceremonial. It was heavy, stretched thin with disbelief. The delegates who had once smirked at the human presence now sat rigid in their seats, eyes dimmed, voices gone. Chancellor Vorn was the first to speak. Ambassador Vance, he said carefully, your sentinels have neutralized a threat that would have reached our colonies within hours. His voice trembled, a sound not from weakness, but realization. Yet you never informed this council of their existence. That secrecy saved your lives, Lyra interrupted gently. If we had announced them, they'd have been feared, dismantled, or copied. You've seen how your worlds react to power they can't control. Admiral Duran's mandibles clicked sharply. You've deceived us. You've built an arsenal under our very eyes. Tell me, Ambassador, what happens when those sentinels turn toward us? Lyra looked at him steadily. Then you'll have to ask yourselves why they would. The answer hung in the air like a challenge. No one dared meet her gaze. Dr. Saren broke the tension. The array didn't attack anyone unprovoked. It mirrored hostility. It responded only when a clear threat appeared. You all witnessed that. Vorn nodded slowly, fragments of light scattering through his crystalline form. Still, the precedent stands. A single species holds the power to decide when a war begins or ends. Lyra's tone remained calm, unwavering. No, Chancellor, time decides. We just learned to listen to it. Her words settled like dust, quiet but unignorable. The council members began whispering among themselves, their voices rising and falling in waves of fear and fascination. Vorn finally called for order. We will vote, he declared, whether humanity's seat at this council remains, given their concealment. Rafe's jaw tightened, but Lyra placed a hand on his arm, a subtle gesture telling him to wait. The voting crystals ignited one by one, each representing a world's verdict, red for expulsion, blue for retention. The colors flickered across the chamber, uncertain, shifting, like the tide deciding which shore to claim. When the final crystal dimmed, the result appeared. Humanity retained its seat by a single vote. That vote belonged to Vorn. The Chancellor's light burned low as he turned to face Lyra. You've shown us something we thought impossible, he said. Patience is a form of power. Lyra inclined her head. Patience isn't power, Chancellor. It's perspective. Power is what the impatient waste while they're waiting. The council adjourned in uneasy silence. Delegates left in clusters, their whispers following the humans like echoes down the polished halls. Saren looked at Lyra once they were alone. Do you think they understand us now? Lyra gave a faint smile. No, but they'll start watching their clocks differently. The transport glided silently through the velvet dark, a single thread of light among uncountable stars. Inside, the hum of the engines was soft enough to be mistaken for breathing. Lyra Vance sat by the observation window, her reflection faint against the streak of the stars, hands clasped loosely in her lap. The council chamber was far behind them now, its echoes already fading. Rafe stood beside her, still in uniform, his posture as rigid as the silence between them. "They'll never trust us again," he said quietly. "They never truly did," Lyra replied. "But now at least, they'll respect the distance." Dr. Saren entered, datapad in hand, eyes tired but alight with curiosity. "The array's still active," she said. "Minimal energy draw, background level transmissions only. It's watching." Lyra's gaze didn't leave the stars. "That's all it was built to watch until we needed it." Rafe turned toward her. "How long were we waiting exactly?" Lyra smiled faintly. "Since before they ever looked up." For a moment, no one spoke. Beyond the shuttle's hull, one of the sentinel lights pulsed in the distance. Faint but steady. The same rhythm, 7 seconds apart. A quiet promise still beating across the dark. Saren watched it flicker. "Do we tell them about the others?" Lyra shook her head. "No, not yet. Some lessons only hold value when they're earned." The silence returned, softer now. Outside, the stars seemed closer, each one a patient observer, a mirror of their own endurance. The hum of the engines deepened as the ship changed course, sliding into the dark between systems. Rafe glanced at her one last time. "And when patience runs out?" Lyra's eyes followed the distant pulse until it faded into the horizon of the void. Her answer was quiet, certain. "Then we start the next wait." The stars rolled past like a slow tide, each one blinking in that steady rhythm, ancient and deliberate. The ship vanished into the dark, leaving behind only silence, and the faint, lingering truth that patience was not the absence of action. It was the mastery of time.